I'm going to give just a few remarks, just kind of thinking out loud about the weekend. These are formal remarks, but they'll be fairly brief, about 15 to 20 minutes, and then Christopher Sen will come up here and introduce our next plenary speaker. So these are really just thoughts about the week that I think we can continue in different contexts. I do want to say these things because I know we're being recorded, and these will be on the web, and we can continue the conversation that way later. The first thing I want to say is I do want to talk about the superhumanities a bit. Marcus Red really flagged this for us when he talked about literature. Literature as a place that's certainly neither science nor religion, and so plays by different games and becomes a kind of place of experimenting, of what I would call gnosis, a kind of different kind of knowing. Marcus was really clear that human deification, becoming stars in outer space, the kinds of things we're still looking at go back as far as we can see in the written record. They actually go back to Egypt and Africa in particular. And I just want to point out that this kind of knowing has absolutely nothing to do with Western colonialism or white rationalism. It's ancient, it's deep, it's part of the human story. The conventional humanities are really the future superhumanities in disguise then. Clark Kent is in truth Superman. Don't be fooled by the glasses. I also want to say something about secrecy, confidentiality. This has come up a lot of times in our conversation in different contexts. All these walls of secrecy that prevent us from having a kind of open conversation in what Diana called the visible college. I just want to add something here. I've worked a lot on secrecy in the history of religions, and secrecy is not just something imposed on the impossible by the military or the government, nor is it simply a matter of the ethics of citing private correspondence, which we've talked about. Those are all really important issues. But that's really not what secrecy is about in the literature, at least I'm most familiar with. Secrecy is also interior to or inherent in the impossible. And I'm speaking here of the ineffability of mystical states, to use a kind of common academic language. I'm also drawing from the confidential stories that different correspondents and friends have told me. It is not that there is some kind of clear content, some kind of secret that I could whisper to you if I chose to, right? I think that's how most people think of secrets. That's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a form of knowing and experience that is entirely outside language and reason. It's simply not a matter of language. It's simply not a matter of reason. And so it's secret to, if you will, the left brain. It's a kind of right brain way of knowing, to invoke another model. I always think of Nietzsche here, and I want to read you a quote from one of his last books, maybe his last book, Ecce Homo, which, by the way, was a kind of playful self-deification. Behold the man, it's taken from the Gospel of John. Nietzsche writes, "For what one lacks access to from experience, one will have no ear." Now let us imagine an extreme case, that a book speaks of nothing but events that lie altogether beyond the possibility of any frequent or even rare experience. That is the first language for a new series of experiences. In that case, Nietzsche writes, simply nothing will be heard. But there will be the acoustic illusion that where nothing is heard, nothing is there. So he's really referring to a kind of mystical experience that cannot be heard by people who have not had that kind of experience. And of course, that's certainly me, that's most of us. Nietzsche, by the way, embodies the Clark Kent and the Superman almost perfectly. Not only did he make famous the figure of the Superman, which the later American comic book translated into an adolescent and pop cultural mode, Nietzsche could write powerfully that, quote, every word is a kind of prejudice, unquote. That's the postmodern humanities. But he could also claim to know, quote, reality as it is, unquote. That's the future superhumanities. The second thing I want to say is I want to talk a bit about the implications of the impossible. I think Eric Wargo had the most to say here. Eric's always an exemplar of the intellectual who follows up on the philosophical implications of these kinds of experiences. Eric does not only write of impossible precognitive dreams, he tries to give a framework for making these impossible things possible at the edges of our contemporary science and understanding. And so should we, I think. Let me give you another example that was not brought up this weekend, but I think is really important here. Over the years, I have begged intellectuals to take up reincarnation, not as an established fact, but as an extremely common and globally distributed mode of human experience and conviction. The empirical evidence is more than suggestive, and the philosophical implications are vast. If, for example, we take children who remember previous lives seriously, it naturally follows that we are not only these present bodies, or our next ones, or our next ones. I have often wondered over the years why academics will not talk about the universal human experience of physical death and what human beings have claimed for millennia comes after, as the psychiatrist Bruce Grayson has hymned it. I think I know why conventional academics will not speak of these experiences or these ideas. Academics assume that we are our bodies, these bodies in particular. I seriously doubt that. That is not entirely wrong, of course, but if the history of human civilization means anything, it is also not entirely right either. It is half right, but also half wrong. Similar implications spin out for common impossible phenomena like precognition and free will. If someone has an accurate precognitive experience of a series of banal events that will not happen for 3 years, as one of my friends reported in great detail, the implications, I think, are pretty obvious. The future has already happened. Like Eric, I am not a fan of the many worlds theory. I think it is a cop-out, actually, a way that cosmologists and physicists originally tried to preserve a meaningless, random universe. That is another story, but one I think we need to hear someday. Doubting our doubt. Finally, I hope it is obvious that I have some pretty severe doubts about our doubts. To take something most basic in our postmodern and post-human ideologies, it is common and acceptable to deny or reject human exceptionalism. The problem is that human beings are exceptional. Mike's comment about the brain above the eyes in the only species we know of, yes, but also endless Hindu and Buddhist models of endless reincarnation and the infinite opportunity of a human birth, which is the goal and telos of the reincarnation process, where a human birth is considered even better than the birth of a deity. Again, this has absolutely nothing to do with European colonialism or Enlightenment rationalism, but it is simply everywhere in Asia, going back thousands and thousands of years. Similarly, there is the common assumption that human beings cannot have a direct and absolute experience of reality as it is. But who says Immanuel Kant? Certainly not Nietzsche, or Shankara, or the dozens of Buddhist philosophers I read in graduate school. I recall a Sanskrit phrase, yata bhutam. It simply means reality as it is. This is the goal of Buddhist practice. Let us not confuse then our secularism or postmodernism with the universal truth of things, with all of human experience. Transcendence and deification. Similarly, what do we do with the common human experience of the total transcendence of physical reality, or of realizing one is an expression of or even identical to what the religions call God? The history of religions is a history of human deification. Do we just deny that now? Pretend it never happened? Assume our modern or postmodern secular worldview is the universal truth of things? Take the modern NDE literature. Take a contemporary author like Nancy Dannison. Dannison reports a whole series of profound experiences of literally becoming God, of utterly transcending the human, who in her own experience and knowings becomes a temporary transition, a body inhabited for a time, for a particular set of reasons, but little more. Again, in these knowings, we are not just Clark Kent. We are superhumans, which also means we are non-humans. Finally, I want to say something about the humor of the worthless psychic, as Annalisa put it. I laughed at her crumpled up $1 bill story. Philip K. Dick, this is where I'm going to end. Philip K. Dick tells this wonderful story about how he had this massive precognition about a most astonishing book in his library that would reveal the secret of the universe. Perhaps it was Astounding Stories. Perhaps it was some other pulp fiction, science fiction story. In any case, it was amazing, and he just had to find the right book. Phil at last found the precious book of his precognitive vision, The Philosopher's Stone. It turned out to be the most boring biography in the world, a biography of Grover Cleveland. So I'll end there. Thank you very much.